What's up, YouTube? So before we get started with this video on ESPN NFL, I'm going to be discussing the San Francisco 49ers. I'm going to go over what happened last year, what's presently going on, and my expectations for next year. So let's start out by going to the standings. So here's a look at the NFL standings for last year. So let's take a quick look at the NFC. So the first thing that jumps out at me in the NFC is that there are three teams that are number one place. So at 13-3. So that's the Green Bay Packers, New Orleans Saints, and the San Francisco 49ers. Out of the pack, the San Francisco 49ers were able to come out and make it to the Super Bowl. So let's take a look at the number one teams in the NFC. So the Green Bay Packers had an excellent year last year, obviously at 13-3. Aaron Rodgers had a comeback year because the prior 2 years before that, they weren't even able to make the playoffs. So this is a huge year for Aaron Rodgers to come back and really put in work and show that he still has it as being a Hall of Fame quarterback. He did have a new head coach, Mr. Matt LaFleur. Now, I don't know if that necessarily had a huge part of it, but it definitely helped. And whatever it was, Aaron Rodgers was back to playing the way he was in his old days when he was an absolute consistent beast. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is 13-3, number one in the NFC is the New Orleans Saints. So Drew Brees had another great year. I think he broke so many. I think he might have all the all-time passing records as a quarterback, and I think he passed Peyton Manning with a lot of records last year for passing, and he just absolutely killed it. It also helped that he had the number one wide receiver in the league, Mr. Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas balled out last year. So the New Orleans Saints definitely had a great year last year, and they're coming off of from 2 years ago when in the playoffs there was that pass interference call or the non-pass interference call that they should have had that would have probably put them in the Super Bowl. So they kind of came back and had another great run last year. They absolutely killed it. So the final team I talk about that's 13-3, number one, was the number one team in the NFC last year, was the San Francisco 49ers. The San Francisco 49ers absolutely killed it last year. And I think they had one of the biggest turnarounds in the NFL, because I think the year before last they were 4-12, and then to come back that next year and be 13-3, I think that's the largest turnaround. Some of that has to do with the drafting. So they drafted defensive end out of Ohio State, Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa was an absolute beast. I mean, that guy, I think he had 9 or 10 sacks last year. He was I do recall if he was the defensive rookie of the year. And he just absolutely killed it. I mean, he really set the tone for what was going on the defensive line for the San Francisco 49ers, while in the backfield with the DBs, Richard Sherman was partnering work. So they all complemented each other excellently, which gave them one of the top defenses in the NFL. So another team I kind of like to talk about is the Seattle Seahawks, because the Seattle Seahawks absolutely killed it. Russell Wilson killed it again. He had a great year. The record might not reflect it, but that's how strong the division was, or the conference was, with all these top players. I mean, the Green Bay Packers, New Orleans Saints, San Francisco 49ers, and they all played against each other. So let's take a look at some of those games. So in the playoffs, the Green Bay Packers versus San Francisco 49ers, they lost. The Green Bay Packers lost 37-20 in the playoffs, and they also lost early in the year to San Francisco. Then you have the San Francisco 49ers play the New Orleans Saints, where the San Francisco 49ers won 48-46. Then you have the New Orleans Saints versus the Seattle Seahawks. New Orleans Saints won 33-27. And then you have San Francisco versus Seattle. They played against each other twice, and each team had a win or loss. So all these top hitters played against each other. And like I said, it was neck and neck. You didn't know who was going to be the number one team in the NFC last year, because that's how stacked they were. I mean, they were just absolutely killing it. So that pretty much sums up everything I want to go with the standings. Like I said, the San Francisco 49ers came out at the top of the pack, made it to the Super Bowl, and they just absolutely killed it. Let's see. Another thing I want to talk about real quick is in the NFC East, the Dallas Cowboys. So Dallas Cowboys, I was really disappointed. Even though they're sitting at 8-8, 500, I think they could have at least gone over 500. I mean, they have a pretty good stacked team. So I was a little disappointed in the Cowboys and Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott, because they could have definitely done better, because on paper they have a great stacked team. So I think they should have at least beat, the Philadelphia Eagles. for a division, but it is what it is. I know a lot of it, probably 85%, 90% of it is their coach. The coach is absolute trash. He doesn't know how to use his star players. So that's kind of an excuse, I guess, for the Dallas Cowboys. But so this pretty much wraps up the standings. Again, the San Francisco 49ers were at the top of the pack for the NFC of all the teams that were 13-3. So let's go to the directly to see what the 49ers are up to. So here we can see the San Francisco 49ers player stats for last year. So the 49ers offense ranked out at the fourth best offense in the league. So they put up 6,097 yards. They averaged 380 yards a game. Passing, they threw for 3,792 yards and averaged 237 passing yards a game. And rushing, they ran for 2,305 yards and 144 yards per game, and they put up 479 points and almost 30 points a game. So the San Francisco 49ers offense is definitely a great offense. So let's take a quick look at some of the team leaders. You have Jimmy Garoppolo, their bread and butter quarterback. Raheem Mostert, running back. Receiving, George Kittle, probably one of the best tight ends in the league right now. Tackles, Mr. Fred Warner for the 118 tackles. And Mr. Richard Sherman definitely putting in work with 3 picks, the team high for the San Francisco 49ers. So let's take a quick look at Jimmy Garoppolo. So Jimmy Garoppolo had an excellent year last year. So he put up 3,978 yards. That's 12th overall for quarterbacks. He had 27 touchdowns, tied for 5th overall for quarterbacks. He had 13 picks. That's tied for 23rd overall for quarterbacks. I don't quite like that, but I could deal with that. His QBR was 58.8. That's 12th overall for quarterbacks. So like I said, Jimmy Garoppolo had a great year last year, leading his team to being 13-3. He beat some of the best players or the best teams in the NFC last year. So he beat the New Orleans Saints. He beat the Green Bay Packers twice, once in the playoffs and once during the regular season. He beat the Seattle Seahawks. They played each other twice, and he beat them the second time they played, which was the last game of the year, which gave them excellent momentum going into the playoffs. So let's take a quick look at Jimmy Garoppolo's past couple of games. So the Super Bowl, Jimmy Garoppolo didn't do as good as most wanted. So his stats aren't terribly bad. As you can see, he went 20 for 31, 219 yards, 64% completion percentage, and he threw 2 picks with 1 touchdown. Those 2 picks really, set the tone for the game for the Kansas City Chiefs. Especially the defense was killing it for Jimmy Garoppolo, but he just couldn't finish up in the fourth quarter. I do remember that the coaching was absolutely terrible play calling by Mr. Shanahan, terrible play calling. But still, Jimmy's the quarterback. You got to come through. You got to put some points up on the board. So we can take a quick look at Green Bay. You can see right there, he threw the rock 8 times and went 6 for 8. That you can tell the San Francisco 49ers don't have the most amount of confidence in Jimmy Garoppolo throwing the ball, because they're only throwing the ball 8 times in the NFC Championship, and you can't even throw the ball 10 times. So I think that's the game where Mr. Raheem Mostert he ran the rock like 30 times for 220 yards. So that was a huge game right there that all other parts other than Jimmy Garoppolo really put them over the hump with Green Bay. But mostly Mr. Raheem Mostert, because that guy absolutely balled. He had like 30 rushes for 220 yards and I think 4 or 5 touchdowns. Yeah, so he definitely saved the day. So another thing that kind of stands out is when they beat Seattle in the last game of the year. So he went 18 for 22 for 285 yards. And let's see no touchdowns. But that was a big game right there, because that's, the Seattle Seahawks are definitely competitors. And that's a big win, beating Seattle and going into the playoffs. So that's huge right there. So Jimmy Garoppolo, like I said, he had a good year last year. I do have my worries about him going, head-to-head with quarterback shot for shot like what he did with Patrick Mahomes, because that's just something I worry about him. I'm thinking that the coach needs to use Jimmy Garoppolo in a different way. I wouldn't have him going shot for shot with the quarterback. I'd find some type of other scheme that can get Jimmy Garoppolo going and, accenting his good points and not his weak points. But Jimmy Garoppolo definitely had a good year last year. So let's go back. So next up let's go to Mr. Raheem Mostert. He's the leading running back. Mr. Raheem Mostert, he ran the rock 137 times. That's 31st overall for running backs. He ran for 772 yards. That's 25th overall for running backs. He had 8 touchdowns. That's tied for 9th overall for running backs. And he averaged 5.6 yards a run. That's 2nd overall for running back. So Mr. Raheem Mostert definitely pulled his own weight. He definitely took care of business. And in the big games, he definitely arrived. Like I said, in the Green Bay game, you can see that he ran the rock 29 times for 220 yards, averaged 7.6 yards a run, and he had 4 touchdowns. So he definitely showed up big time when the 49ers needed him to get them over the hump. So his numbers show that he's not the best running back in the league, but he pulls his own weight, and he's not anything that I would worry about for the San Francisco 49ers, because I know he's going to be there and he's going to take care of business. And he also shares time with a couple other running backs too that really, keep them mixed up, keep them the rotation going fresh. So let's go back. Okay, so who else we have the running back there? So Mr. Matt Breida, he is now with the Miami Dolphins. So we can count him out. He shared a lot of time with Mr. Mostert. He had 123 rushes, so he definitely shared some time with him. Let's go check out Tevin Coleman. So Tevin Coleman ran the rock 137 times. That's 31st overall for running backs. He had 544 yards. That's 35th overall for running backs. He had 6 touchdowns. That's not 19th overall for running backs. And he averaged 4 yards a run. That's 35th overall for running backs. So again, he's not the best running back in the world, but he definitely is a major role player, and he pulls his own weight. And he's excellent in a rotation between him and Mr. Mostert. So these two guys complement each other. Let's see some of his big games. So some of his big games were in the playoffs against Minnesota in the NFC Divisional, where he ran the rock 22 times and had 105 yards. So that right there, definitely, he took care of business against Minnesota. And then next week against Green Bay, Mr. Raheem Mostert took care of business against Green Bay, where he ran, 29 times for 220 yards and 4 touchdowns. So both of these guys just play off each other, and you don't know who's going to just blow up at what point. So this is a good rotation, I think. This is Mr. Tevin Coleman. I definitely expect big things from him coming up next year, and Mr. Raheem Mostert in rotation. So this guy is going to definitely be killing it. So let's go back. So let's take a. So we just saw the rushing. Who else do I want to put on there? I think I'll keep Deebo Samuel for wide receiver. So let's go to receiving. So let's go check out Mr. George Kittle, the best tight end in the league right now, possibly. So George Kittle is one of the best tight ends in the league right now. At least he was last year. So he had 85 receptions, 17th overall for tight ends. He had 1,053 yards. That's 23rd overall for tight ends. And he had 5 touchdowns. That's 42nd overall for tight ends. And he averaged 12.4 yards a catch. That's 57th overall for tight ends or receivers. So George Kittle is definitely a major part of this offense, and he was a huge target for Jimmy Garoppolo. His numbers show that he's not. Those aren't number one tight end type numbers, but George Kittle definitely comes through when it's time, when they need a big first down on 3rd and long. He's definitely a target that you can target, and he's going to catch the rock and definitely take care of business. So let's take a quick look at some of his couple of games. So his biggest game of the past 5 games would probably be against the Seattle Seahawks, and that was the last game of the year when they beat Seattle, and he went 7 for 7, 86 yards, no touchdowns. But yeah, so that the Seattle Seahawks game, that was a big game for him. He definitely put in work. And if he's not getting a rock, he's a decoy, and it's definitely going to keep keep defenses honest. And you definitely have to account for where George Kittle's at. So let's go back here. So I would say that pretty much wraps up, I guess, the receiving. Emmanuel Sanders, I would check him out, but Emmanuel Sanders is now with the New Orleans Saints, so he's gone, like I said. So who else is there? George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Mostert. Yeah, okay, so quick look at the 49ers defense last year. The defense was absolutely stellar. I think that's the best part of the San Francisco 49ers team last year is their defense, that killer defense. So let's take a quick look at that Mr. Warner. He's the leading tackler for 118, 3 sacks. So let's see what Mr. Warner was up to. So Mr. Warner had 89 solo tackles, and I can see, well, I know he had 118 overall tackles. So that would be 6th overall for linebackers. He had 3 sacks. That's 125th overall for linebackers, so he's not too strong there. I know it depends on the scheme and all that, but you only had 1 pick, so that's 103rd overall for linebackers. So Mr. Fred Warner was all over the field. He was doing a good job. He's definitely pulling his weight and making some plays. So let's check out what he did in the playoffs and how he did. So against the LA Rams, second to last game, he had 11 tackles, 8 solo, 3 assisted. Against the Seattle Seahawks, he had a good game. Well, he played against them. So his best game was against against probably Kansas City. He definitely showed out. He took care of business against Kansas City in the Super Bowl, and I guess Minnesota too. So Mr. Fred Warner is definitely we're going to need him this year to do the same thing he did last year to help get them get to the Super Bowl. So let's go back and see what else we have on defense. Who else do we have here? So Mr. Fred Warner is leading the team with 118 tackles. Let's see what defensive line is up to. So Mr. DeForest Buckner, he had 7.5 sacks for the Niners last year, but Mr. Buckner is now an Indianapolis Colt. So he's gone. So they're going to need somebody to fill his shoes. So I know they drafted a rookie that's going to jump on in there and take his spot. But other than that, who else we have on other stars on defense? So let's talk about Richard Sherman. So Richard Sherman is an excellent veteran that really had a good year last year. So Mr. Richard Sherman had 48 solo tackles, 112th overall. I think he had more total tackles. He had 3 picks last year. That's tied for 20th overall, and I think a team high. 11 pat downs. That's tied for 26th overall for DB. Richard Sherman definitely took care of business. I was very surprised. I knew he was a baller, and I knew he was still balling. But what he did last year was like a huge comeback, an absolute huge comeback. And he was an integral part of the 49ers going to Super Bowl because he helped lock down that defense in the backfield while Nick Bosa took care of business from the line. So let's take a quick look at what Mr. Sherman did in his last 5 games. So in the Super Bowl, he had 5 tackles, no sacks. Let's see what was one of his best games. So assistance, 4 for 4, sack, assistant. He had a pick or 2 in here. Maybe I have to go to the next one. But so he had 5 tackles in the Super Bowl. Yeah, so let's go back to the other stats. But Richard Sherman had a great year last year. Made the Pro Bowl. Definitely took care of business. I don't see why anything would change for him from last year to this year. So I would expect the same thing from Richard Sherman taking care of business. So let's go back. I know he had, so there he had 3 picks, but I thought he had a couple picks in the playoffs. I know he did. I don't know whether or not showing that, but let's go back. Going down. So we had to take care of him. So let's check out Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa was another guy that was anchored the defensive line that just went crazy last year. So let's see what he's talking about. So Nick Bosa had 32 tackles. That's 150th for defensive lineman. He had 9 sacks last year. That's tied for 22nd for defensive lineman. And he had 1 interception. That's 103rd for defensive lineman. So Joey's his brother. Nick Bosa definitely had a great year last year. I do believe he was the defensive rookie of the year. He absolutely just killed it. He was all over the place making big plays. When they needed big play, you can count on Nick Bosa getting there, putting pressure on the quarterback, if not sacking the quarterback. If that doesn't happen, he brushes the quarterback to throw the rock, and Mr. Richard Sherman pops up and picks it. So, this whole team from, the line to the DBs, they were all just a bunch of ballers and killers on there that I can't wait to see, how they do this coming up season after they just had a nice Super Bowl run. I can't imagine too much is going to change because they pretty much have everybody back. So, I don't know. Let's take a quick look down here with Nick Bosa's past couple of games. So, against Seattle, he had 6 tackles. Definitely putting in work. There we go. So against the Minnesota Vikings, he had 2 sacks, 6 tackles. So he absolutely went off against the Minnesota Vikings. They couldn't stop him at all. And then against Green Bay, he had 4 tackles and 1 sack. So definitely putting in work against Aaron Rodgers. And then in the Super Bowl against Patrick Mahomes and Kansas City Chiefs, he had 5 tackles and 1 sack. So Nick Bosa was just all over the place. And when it's time for him to rise in big games, he absolutely did. I mean, just absolutely rose and took care of business and tried to set the tone. So I can't wait to see, Mr. Nick Bosa in this upcoming season to see what he's going to do. He could be working for overall Defensive Player of the Year, not just Defensive Rookie of the Year, but overall Defensive Player of the Year. I can't wait to see how this guy does. I'm a D-line type guy, so I love these guys coming off the edge and just putting in work. So let's go back and see what else we have to talk about. So who else do we have on here that was really taking care of business? So we can check out D Ford. Mr. D Ford definitely took care of business. He had 6.5 sacks. So let's check him out real quick, because I know he's going to be online and possible the rotation. So Mr. D Ford had 10 tackles last year, so that's not the most. Okay, he had 6.5 sacks. It's tied for 52nd overall for D lineman. That's good. I'll take that. I'll definitely take that from a guy. No picks on it, but he definitely took care of business. Did what he was supposed to do. Let's take a look at his last 5 games in the playoffs. So 1 tackle. So we got a sack against the Minnesota Vikings, and Minnesota Vikings absolutely just got beat up against Arizona, second to last game. So Mr. D Ford is a baller. He's going to be there. Great supporting cast. I expect him to have another year where he's definitely contributing. So let's go back. So that pretty much wraps it up for the defense. I just want to go over a few things real quick. Don't get me wrong. There are other ballers on here that I should be talking about, but just for the sake of time, I just went over a few of the pivotal figures for the defense of the San Francisco 49ers. So let's take a quick look at the 49ers draft. So I'm going to be talking about some of the key players that they drafted that will be able to most likely start this coming up year. So the number 1 pick was Javon Kinlaw. He's a defensive tackle from out of South Carolina. He goes for 6'5", 324 pounds. So let's see what they say about him in the pre-draft analysis. Kinlaw has excellent size, long arms, and carries his weight exceptionally well. He has the potential to develop into an elite interior pass rusher. He has a quick first step, draws offensive linemen on contact, and has the quick hands to get off blocks. Kinlaw has the upper body strength to lock out and does a good job of locating the ball as run defender. He is tall for an interior defensive lineman and has some problems anchoring with his pads when his pads rise. So if that's the only problem you have with Mr. Kinlaw is that he doesn't anchor down, that's easy to fix. You can definitely remedy that, going over technique and his drills and all that to make sure he keeps his butt down low and he's lower than the offensive lineman that he's going to be pushing around. So I don't really see that as a problem. So Mr. Kinlaw would definitely, I think he's probably going to have an opportunity to come in and start immediately, because last year, DeForest Buckner, I think now he's with the Indianapolis Colts. And last year, I do believe he had like 7.5 sacks. So the 49ers are definitely going to miss that. But Kinlaw is definitely going to have an opportunity to come in and start and fill that hole that's left over by DeForest Buckner. And he can follow suit with what they did last year on defensive line with Nick Bosa and company, because they had a crazy defensive line. Those guys were some animals. So let's see what they say about Mr. Kinlaw and his post-draft analysis. So, post-draft analysis, San Francisco had the top pass defense, second best total defense, and 8th ranked scoring defense in the league last year. I would definitely believe that, because there were some savages on defense last year. If the 49ers were going to go defense, taking a corner seemed more likely, but outstanding effort up front played a big role in the Super Bowl run last year. The 49ers traded DeForest Buckner to the Colts. Yeah, so that right there, that's going to be an issue. Like I said, he put up 7.5 sacks last year, and that's definitely going to be missed. But Kinlaw's going to have a chance to come in and get his spot. So continue on. Kinlaw has the talent to fill the considerable hole Buckner leaves behind. So again, he'll definitely have his chance to start and fight for this position. DeForest Buckner was a pretty big guy too. He's like 6'7", like 310. So that's going to be Mr. Kinlaw is definitely going to have a chance to come in and fill that hole, because he's 6'4", 6'5". 324. So that's definitely going to be an opportunity for Mr. Kinlaw. And I think he's probably going to have a chance to start. So that wraps it up for Mr. Kinlaw. Quick look at the San Francisco 49ers second pick. They picked Mr. Brandon Ayuk. He's a wide receiver from out of Arizona State, and he goes for 6 foot, 205 pounds. So let's see what they say about him in the pre-draft analysis. So Ayuk is an above-average route runner with the burst to separate from man-to-man coverage, and he's dangerous after the catch. He's on the shorter side, and his hands are a little inconsistent, but he has an outstanding catch radius for his frame. In addition to great body control, Ayuk tracks the ball well and is fast enough to threaten vertically. He has the skill set to make an immediate impact in the return game too. So that's huge right there. So that means Mr. Ayuk is multi-dimensional. Not only can he play wide receiver, but he can go on special teams and take care of business in special teams, which makes him more valuable. So definitely he's going to have his chance because as I see it, there's 2 holes right now at wide receiver. Emmanuel Sanders is now with the New Orleans Saints, which is going to make the New Orleans Saints even more dangerous. The Drew Brees and the number 1 receiver last year, Michael Thomas, with Emmanuel Sanders and Kamara, man, that New Orleans offense is going to be nasty, even nastier than they were last year. Also, for the San Francisco 49ers, the hole receiver with Mr. Matt Breida. So now Mr. Matt Breida plays for the Miami Dolphins. So that's 2 holes of receiver right there that the 49ers are going to need to fill. And Mr. Ayuk is going to have a chance to definitely get in there and make some moves. So let's take a look at the post-draft analysis from Mr. Ayuk. So it says George Kittle is one of the best tight ends in the league right now. I definitely agree with that. Deebo Samuel is a promising talent. I definitely agree with that. It's not clear what the 49ers have in 2019 third-round pick Jalen Hurd, who finished the year on injured reserve. I don't know what's going on with that guy. I'm going to be honest. So San Francisco has some talented pass catchers, but Emmanuel Sanders signing with the Saints creates a need at wide receiver, and projects as a rookie starter. Yeah, so definitely I could see Mr. Ayuk being a starter because there's 2 holes open, and if he can play special teams too and be effective, he's definitely going to be a valuable need for the 49ers next year, especially after the loss they've taken at wide receiver. And hopefully he'll be able to, get on the same page with Mr. Jimmy Garoppolo. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up for the draft picks, or the draft picks I think are going to start, or have the potential to start for the San Francisco 49ers. So the depth chart real quick. So obviously we have quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo, led his team to the Super Bowl, led the 49ers to going 13-3 last year. He beat up some of the heavy hitters in the NFC last year. He beat up the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers, beat them twice, once in the playoffs. He beat up the New Orleans Saints and Drew Brees, 48-46. So that's a huge win. Also with the number 1 receiver, Michael Thomas. He also beat up the Seattle Seahawks with Russell Wilson, and that was the last game of the year, which gave them like a ton of momentum going into the playoffs. Even though Russell Wilson beat them early in the year, Jimmy Garoppolo got the last laugh. So Jimmy Garoppolo, like I said, I expect big things for him next year. My only concern is having him go toe-to-toe with an elite quarterback. I know he went against Drew Brees. I know he went against Aaron Rodgers. I know he went against Russell Wilson. But I still have questions of him going toe-to-toe because things did not work out when he went toe-to-toe against Patrick Mahomes in a Super Bowl last year. But then again, I think Mr. Shanahan didn't use Jimmy Garoppolo correctly because you were winning, you were taking care of business with the running game, and then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, you decided to start throwing with Jimmy Garoppolo. So there's a lot of things going on there. But Jimmy Garoppolo, I expect big things from him next year. So running back Raheem Mostert was the leading rusher for the 49ers last year. I expect him to come back and be right on cue with what he was doing from last year. So he might not be splitting as much time with other receiver or running backs, but I definitely I can see him doing the same thing what he did last year. So wide receiver Deebo Samuel, I expect him to be another contributor. His numbers might jump up a little bit more and get a little bit more chunkier and obese. So another wide receiver is Kendrick Bourne. So he's going to be another role-playing receiver to get in there and take care of business. Then at the other receiver, you have Brandon Ayuk. So he's going to be a rookie out of Arizona State that looks pretty good. So this is going to be very important for the 49ers to have Brandon Ayuk really step it up because they lost 2 wide receivers last year. So they lost Emmanuel Sanders from now he's playing for the New Orleans Saints, and then they lost Matt Breida. He's now playing for the Miami Dolphins. So that's two big holes. So Brandon Ayuk is really going to have to step it up. So going down to tight end, George Kittle might be one of the best tight ends in the league right now because he really put in work last year. His numbers might not necessarily show that he's a number one tight end, but he definitely makes plays, and when you need him, he steps it up big time. So George Kittle, I expect him to get even better. He's just a baller. So our left tackle, you have Trent Williams. He's going to take care of business. Left guard, Laken Tomlinson is going to take care of business. Weston Richburg, he's going to take care of business. Right guard, Daniel Brunskill, he's going to take care of business. And right tackle, Mike McGlinchey, he's going to take care of business too. Those big dogs up front took care of business and really opened up some holes for Raheem Mostert and really protected Jimmy Garoppolo. I was about to say Jimmy Garoppolo. Yeah, whatever. So let's go down to the defense. So the defense is going to be, well, let's start off with the line with Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa was an absolute monster last year. He was an absolute beast online. He had 9 sacks. I mean, the guy was just out of control. In the playoffs last year, I think he had 2 or 3 sacks throughout the whole playoffs, one in the Super Bowl. So Nick Bosa, I can expect him to be another beast coming back next year. Last year, he won or earned the defensive rookie of the year. So that's huge right there. I expect another big year from Nick Bosa. So at left tackle, it's going to be Javon Kinlaw. So Javon Kinlaw is going to be a rookie from South Carolina, if I remember correctly. So he's definitely going to have to get in there and have him starting because they traded, or what's his name? DeForest Buckner. He is now playing with the Indianapolis Colts. And DeForest Buckner had 7.5 sacks last year. So that's going to be a huge hole for Javon Kinlaw to fill. But I think he'll get right with Nick Bosa and Solomon Thomas and Eric Armstead. So at right tackle, we're going to have Solomon Thomas. He's going to put in work, do what he needs to do. In the right end, you have Eric Armstead. Eric Armstead had 10 sacks last year. That man was just out of control. I forgot to mention him a little bit earlier, but I'm taking care of business for him now. Eric Armstead is definitely a guy to be watching, and really him and Nick Bosa play off each other on the end. It caused a lot of trouble. So at linebacker, we have Quan Alexander going to do his thing. Fred Warner was the leading tackler for the 49ers last year. He had 118 tackles, I think like 89 solo, and I think 1 pick. So he's going to be all over the place doing what he's got to do. And then you have Dre Greenlaw. He's going to take care of business. Richard Sherman is a Pro Bowler. He got 3 picks last year. He led the team with picks with 3 of them. He's a well-seasoned veteran. He was part of the reason why they got to the Super Bowl last year. And he's the general back there with the DBs. Drokowski Tarch is going to do his thing. Jimmy Ward's going to do his thing. And Akelo Witherspoon's going to do his thing. Special teams, we have Rory Gurich and Mitch Wisnowski. Those guys are going to take care of business too. So that pretty much wraps up everything going on with the San Francisco 49ers. So we covered what happened last year, what's going on presently, and the expectations for next year. And I don't see why the 49ers couldn't make it back to the Super Bowl and take care of business and wreck shop in the NFC this year. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And yeah.